Nathan Fillion's haircut. I totally slammed that haircut as soon as I saw it. And when the first promotional image came out, I was like, that's a terrible haircut. I think one of the best scenes in this movie is the kaiju battle. Every single scene and every single part of this movie is about defining why Superman is who he is. Aloha, movie nerds, dorks, and weirdos. Welcome to a new episode of New Movie Tuesdays. I'm your host, Matthew Salanoa. I'm a filmmaker of over 17 years, and I like to look at movies from the filmmaker's perspective. So, today I have the pleasure of talking about James Gunn's new Superman film, which came out last week at the time of this recording. This should be coming out the week after. And I gotta say, I loved it. Without getting into spoilers too much, I think for those of you who want a really family-friendly, fun time, that's what this movie was totally made for. And to that end, that's why I absolutely will say this is my favorite Superman film since watching the Christopher Reeve ones. Obviously, I'm a little too young to have seen those in theaters, but in the build up to Superman Returns, which came out in 2005 when I was 15 years old, I had watched the Christopher Reeve films, and they were filled with magic and wonder and hope. And Superman Returns, as much as that movie, I do think it's an underrated movie. It also has magic and miracle moments and wonder to it. But overall, the story, it's not very strong on Superman's side, although I think Kevin Spacey's Lex Luthor was supremely awesome. And in the case of Man of Steel, that's a movie which I definitely rejected up front. I thought it was way too dark, way too serious. And although over time I came to really appreciate and love that movie, I have a review of it where I totally came around on it. My initial reaction was very much against it because I felt Superman Returns, for its flaws, at least had the spirit of joy. And I just felt that in both the case of Superman Returns and in the case of Man of Steel, that whether it was the filmmakers or not, or whether it was the studios, it seemed like the wrong lessons were being taken from movies around those movies. Where you look at the Spider-Man movies were the biggest things at the time, and those movies paid a lot of attention to the relationships that Peter Parker had, but that's what makes it a Spider-Man story. And I think they were sort of attempting to do that with Brandon Routh's Superman, and ultimately it just fell apart. And then in the case of Man of Steel, one of the major complaints about Superman Returns is he doesn't punch anybody. One of the lamest complaints about a movie of all time. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, there was action in that movie. The action was good. It's just everything in between the action was pretty slow. You know what I mean? So with those in mind, coming into this movie, and also I grew up with so many Supermen. You know, Dean Cain, he was my first Superman. What a wonderful Superman he was. 5 seasons of great stuff. And then the animated series, which I think those Bruce Timm animated series were perfect. Everyone, perfect Batman. People talk about who's the best Batman. Kevin Conroy's the best Batman. If you say anything else, you're out of your mind. And same with Mark Hamill's Joker. Just, I knew him as Joker before Luke Skywalker. Like, perfect, flawless. Same with Superman. I felt that entire journey, you could have just used the Superman the animated series as an animatic and just shot the live action version of that, and you would have the best Superman movie ever made. And yet not once have we gotten that. And then we have Smallville, and I love Smallville. I really related to that. So So I feel we've had so many Superman that in the build up to seeing this movie, my attitude was just look, Superman can be a bagel at this point. You could put a bagel in a blue and red outfit, and I will be fine with it. I just want to see that super dog because this is the only thing I haven't seen yet. You know what I mean? Give me the super dog. I see in the trailer Lex Luthor breaks into the Fortress of Solitude again, which he does in every single iteration of Superman. Yeah, I'm just like I'm preparing this to see the same things over and over again, and to my delight, and delight is the word it's the operative word here. To my delight, Superman 2025, written and directed by James Gunn. What makes me love this movie is that it was full of joy. It was very positive, and yes, it was very kid friendly. It really took off the adult gloves. I think that was actually what held back Superman Returns and Man of Steel to me is that the adult gloves weren't just on, they were super glued on, you know, and super glue being the operative word there too. Um, but to have a Superman movie where the character was clear and he was positive, he wasn't bogged down by all this drama. Not that Superman can't or shouldn't. I think Smallville is the best example of how Superman should be dealing with his personal baggage. I think Smallville nails who the character is in his heart. And I've always felt like, but once he becomes Superman, what makes the man part have meaning is that he has grown up. But I actually, what I appreciate about this movie is that, yeah, but this is for a modern audience. And part of this movie is sort of seeing Superman. Part of his journey is off screen, which is lame. But for the most part, what works about the movie is that you're seeing a Superman who is new to being a Superman, and by movie's end, he's really on the right path to being the Superman that we all know and love. Like there's a little bit of arc there for him, so it's not just blatant positivity for the sake of being positive. But never mind just that. The supporting cast is wonderful. I mean, the supporting cast for these movies have always been good, but this time around, James Gunn breaks out the genuine comic booky experience that I've never had on the big screen, which is we're getting lots of villains, lots of characters, lots of heroes. Superman is existing in a world where there's other superheroes, so it's not he is the biggest deal, but it's not the biggest deal that there are super people running around. And to finally break out of that mold where all of these movies just keep siloed our superheroes and it's just them against the world. I appreciate that we have the Justice Gang in this movie, and Mr. Terrific is terrific. Nathan Fillion's haircut, I totally slammed that haircut as soon as I saw it. And when the first promotional image came out, I was like, that's a terrible haircut. And I was relieved to find even James Gunn looking looking at the comics like that's a terrible haircut. And yet gleefully he puts Nathan Fillion in that haircut. But honestly, watching the movie, when you see the character and how he is, it like for whatever reason it just clicks. It's just like, oh, of course this guy has this haircut. He's so into himself, even though it's a terrible haircut. He doesn't think so, and he doesn't care, and that's who his character is. Like, there's nothing better in terms of just having a well-defined character than something as distinctive as that. And on the flip side, you have Mr. Terrific, who is, I've always felt from the Unlimited series, kind of like he's a little bit like Batman in terms of his seriousness and his stoicness. But on the other hand, he's also like Mr. Fantastic. He can invent anything. He's the Batman who can invent his own stuff, you know, and he doesn't even, you know, I'm sure he's physically fit, but he doesn't even need to be that because he's invented stuff that could clearly take care of him even if he got beat up somehow. That's what's amazing about his character. And, you know, just this movie just is so fluid. It moves from beginning to end. It's not a slow burn at all. This is a movie. The slowest moments are exactly the opening, which has some title text just to sort of explain that hey, superhumans have been around for a few centuries now, and Superman's only been around for a few years, and here he is after losing his first battle, and and then the movie starts, and it's a really fun time, and I love how everything leads to the next thing in this movie. I have a podcast called Action Movies Storytelling Through Action, where it's all about how the action plays an integral part into the story and the consequences of each action scene. If the action scene didn't happen, the story doesn't move. And thank goodness that is totally part of the threading that keeps this movie together. That even the opening action sequence, or the off-screen opening action sequence, it leads to everything that makes this movie happen. And every single consequence to each action sequence. Superman is growing and changing and learning, and also people are learning about Superman. I think one of the best scenes in this movie is the kaiju battle that we see just the tiniest clip of, and I gotta throw hats off to the trailer editors for not spoiling this movie. There was an enormous amount of action and stuff in this film that was not put in the trailer, and I'm so glad for that. Well, I didn't see the last trailer. I stopped watching trailers after the second trailer. If I watch trailers at all, I'll watch the teaser and the first official trailer, and that's it. Because I hate how trailers have been in the last 10 years, where they just spoil the whole movie, and most of the time it's because there's not much of a movie to spoil, which is very disappointing. In this case, if you only watch the first two trailers, you're in for such a treat. I really wanted to come into this movie with an open mind, not worry about Superman of the past. Also because again, I came around on Henry Cavill, and it was not his fault, but I came around on his movies. I came to understand and appreciate what his movies were trying to accomplish, and sort of became a fan after the fact. So I was just like, I'm already happy now. Like especially by Zack Snyder's Justice League, I was like, dude, they should have just let you do what you wanted to do. The studio needs to stop meddling so much. Um, yeah, they seriously do. But it seems like the right lessons were learned with this movie, and it was an enormously fun time. But let me get back to the kaiju battle. Was awesome, and again, it's just every single scene and every single part of this movie is about defining why Superman is who he is, which is what the movie should be about. And especially if you're not going to do the siloed adventure with Superman by himself and just having to contrast with regular humans, which is it is a bit boring at a certain point. The fact that we have the Justice Gang, and you see how everyone has a different attitude about the same exact things, and that's what character writing is all about. It's all about everyone having a different approach to the same thing, and where that conflict comes. It doesn't necessarily mean people have to fight each other like in Marvel movies, but that they just have to have something of their own to say. Never mind the filmmaker, but the characters have to come from a point of view. But that's what the filmmaker's here to do, is to your hero represents the values of the movie, and they have to bounce up against everybody else, which includes Guy Gardner, Hawk Girl, and Mr. Terrific, but man, not only is the construction of just showcasing how Superman is Superman, it's so good because you see how they tackle fight scenes differently. Not only is just as a piece of storytelling is this well constructed and well written, but the movie is just so fluid and fun. And in the action, although it does get a little crazy, but that's what we're paying for. What we're not paying for, what we expect is a good story. What we're paying for is also great spectacle in between the good story. And this is the first time I feel in a while that we got both. This is the Superman Returns spiritually that I was expecting after watching the first two Superman Christopher Reeve films. And Although Superman was a bit, I feel he was a bit rough around the edges in this movie, but that's kind of the point of the movie. This movie is trying to present to us, and what every filmmaker should do is, like, your main character can't just be perfect. And what I think has been great about Superman Returns and Man of Steel is that the main character isn't perfect. He does make mistakes. But in this movie, it's all centered around, well, his mistakes are still contributing to him learning about who he's supposed to be. And I appreciate that. And I like that this movie can work as a nice little morality tale for kids and just how to act. I think we do live in a crazy time where people have replaced diplomacy with madness, with uh, despite people calling, despite some people calling others fascists, their method and attitude of doing that is being fascists themselves, and they can't see that. And we live in a time where anger has replaced conversation, where a snarky response has replaced intelligent thought, and stamping your feet like a little child has replaced being a mature adult who speaks clearly. And I'd say, even on the side of people who mean well, I think, savage rage has utterly replaced humans being. And we live in a time now where we need this positive Superman more than anything, where people have to learn. And even Superman's still yelling a bit too much in this movie for me, although it's motivated by what's going on in the movie. But even Superman's yelling a bit too much for me. But all that being said, at least he is trying to be the Superman he's meant to be, and I'm hoping that that's what his arc is across these movies, that we will see him become in the next movie and beyond. Because what Superman is, his core characteristic, he's essentially like Professor X in the sense of, I am a stranger in a strange world, but the way to prove not only my humanity, but the value of still being a human myself, is to truly stand on the principle of the behavior I expect from other people. That's Superman or Professor X. You can kind of interchange this one key aspect between the two of them, that being kind and good to others, even when you disagree, is the most important thing you can do, to lead by example. You have to lead by example the level of respect you want from other people. You must also treat others with that respect. Frankly, sadly, today, we people are talking like it's the 1960s again. It's not the 1960s. It's not the 1930s. It's the 2025s. It's the 2020s. We're in a different century now, and we're all talking as if we're living the lives of our parents or our grandparents, and we're not. We are not living in that time. And, you know, even then, I feel their generations had more self respect in how they held themselves, and lived under such horrible conditions in comparison to how we live now, that truly I feel like this angry generation, as much as there are things wrong with society worth being angry about, but this angry generation we live in now, our behavior is akin to spoiled children losing their temper. And I'm disgusted by it. Like, you can't win a battle by being a whiny kid. You have to level yourself up and be an adult and talk to people like an adult. And Superman, I still feel, needs to learn that lesson in this movie. But I think when we reach the end of that movie, he's getting there, and I appreciate that. Seriously, the action is almost nonstop. Not really nonstop, but the movie's just so fluid and it wastes no time. The action. Let me tell you a couple worth the price of admission moments. Okay, these are just little teasers, I would say. I'm not going to say what happens in the scene, but the scene itself, when you get to it, I think you'll agree with me, worth the price of admission. I, of course, watched this on a $5 matinee Tuesday. That's why this is New Movie Tuesdays, because if I saw it in theaters, I saw it for $5 because I'm technically broke right now. But I still want to do this podcasting thing. For my $5 Tuesday, I saw this Superman movie, and I gotta say, like the action, the worth the price of admission. I would say, even if you're paying full price in today's horrendous economy, Mr. Terrific. I mean, as a character, all of his scenes are wonderful, but specifically, Mr. Terrific protecting Lois in his own fight scene against a bunch of bad guys. I won't say who the bad guys are, but you see the moment in the trailer where he generates this red force field around him, and then he starts kicking some butt. And that scene by itself, it's after some of the other moments I'm going to talk about, but that scene by itself, worth the price of admission. Superman versus the kaiju. Superman and the Justice Gang versus that kaiju. That giant kaiju that we see spouting fire out of his mouth. First of all, I love the design because it kind of looks cute. And at the same time, that whole fight scene is both fun and hilarious. And we get a lot of our signature trailer moments. Some people have mentioned saving a squirrel. That may or may not be part of this scene. But that scene by itself was like, it's one of those great moments that's like, oh yeah, I'm in the DC universe right now. It hits me on so many different levels. It makes me feel like I'm watching Justice League Unlimited again for the first time. Even though this is not the mature Superman that I would prefer to see, I'm okay with, like, this is where the story's going. They're not the Justice League, they're the Justice Gang. So we're gonna get there. We'll get there. You know what I mean? So, and that's also what the Justice Gang kind of represents too. They're not part of what makes the Justice League is having the mature, self-controlled Superman at the head who sets the example and tone for everybody, even Batman. But in this case, because they're the Justice Gang, you're seeing how everyone's rough around the edges, and everyone could use a little bit of the moral fortitude of Superman. But you're seeing Superman kind of, these are his early days where aren't like people aren't down with it yet. You know, people love being saved by him. People aren't fully down with his approach to everything. I think we are living in a, not only in the real world, but in the movie, we're living in such a post Dark Knight world where the Justice Gang is okay with killing if it has to be done. And Superman's like, I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not okay with that. I'd rather do the right thing if I can. And that's just an aspect of this scene that I thought, not only am I living Justice League Unlimited, the sort of preamble version, but I'm also just seeing Superman be Superman, and really for the first time have to explain to people, uh, that's not how I do things. You know what I mean? I wouldn't do that. And other people go, well, that's lame, and it's hilarious. But then another great scene. I'm not gonna say where it takes place in the movie. I'll just say the Justice Gang versus the interdimensional imp. That is another worth the price of admission sequence. And I'm not going to say anything more than that. When you get to that scene and you hear interdimensional imp, this is one of the things that's happening in the movie that really made me laugh. And again, it just made me feel like, oh yeah, we're in a comic book movie, dude. This is crazy. Everything with Crypto. I loved every scene with Crypto, especially the ending, like the last 30 minutes. I didn't expect Crypto to be there. He shows up, he plays a part in the end of the movie, and I'll just say, get the toy. Get the toy. When you hear get the toy and everything that happens after get the toy, oh my god, because I don't want to spoil, if you haven't seen it yet, I don't want to spoil the Crypto's following scene after get the toy. And I'm just going to say the line, I'm not going to say where it lands in the movie. How about an upgrade? Okay, all right. How about an upgrade? When you get to that scene, another great moment. It is one of the trailer moments in the movie. But besides these wonderful parts of the film, I think all the reveals are so good. There are reveals that aren't really surprises, but that's fine. It's a comic book movie. What really got me is there's a number of times where I genuinely felt emotional watching this film, and it was because Rachel Brosnahan really plays a wonderful Lois Lane. She's, I think, the best Lois Lane we've gotten yet, and not only that, just her scenes are so human, and I like that when you see her and Clark talk, it's when that's the most human either of these characters have ever been. And I never quite liked how they were handled in the Zack Snyder films, and no shade on them, because again, I came around on those movies, but I felt like this is how I have always felt they should be approached, is like Lois should really be the one person who sees beneath the armor, and also Clark should always be the person who sees beneath her armor, and that's what makes them a good couple. Is that they're both ready to stand on their principles, even if those principles don't make them popular with everyone around them. And that's something that both characters are dealing with, and I appreciate that James Gunn really makes a point. And one of those emotional moments is one of their scenes talking together, just because it kind of hit me on that level. I mean, I grew up loving superheroes. I grew up with all of the Marvel and DC cartoons, growing up with Batman, growing up with all the Batman films. And, I'll talk about this on another podcast, but I've never had a problem with either the Burton or Schumacher Batman films, because for me, I had Kevin Conroy's Batman every single weekend that entire time. So it didn't matter what the movies did. I had the real Batman every single weekend. And I could, through that lens, appreciate when I saw the real Batman show up at any point in any of those movies, even if the movies were zany and wild and did oddball things. And I did not quite feel that way when it came to Superman Returns or the Snyderverse until Zack Snyder's Justice League. Once we got Zack Snyder's Justice League, that's where I realized, Snyder was also just trying to build Superman into the Superman we know, but he wanted us to travel that journey with him. And it's really Snyder's Justice League that made me see exactly what James Gunn is doing here with this movie. But all that being said, I feel like with Superman, with this Superman, this is the first time I'm actually feeling like I'm watching Superman, and not feeling like, well, why is he acting this way? Why is he destroying so much stuff? Why is he depressed and Lois Lane doesn't like him? I'm not asking, to me, what I feel are the wrong questions. That's always, as someone who has sort of story consulted with a lot of my filmmaking friends over the years, my number one thing I've always said to all of my friends is, don't make the audience ask the wrong questions. Whatever happens in your script, you should be making the audience ask the right questions. They should want to lean in and find out more, and not be asking, well, why did that happen? That's kind of weird. Or it should be more like, hey, why did that happen? But if you're making the audience ask the wrong questions, that's what leads to people hating your movie. because why didn't Superman tell Lois he was leaving in Superman Returns? I mean, that's literally something that makes zero sense for the character. Period. And same with Man of Steel. Why is he destroying every single thing he sees? This is a Superman with a lot of internal anger, clearly. And to me, again, that's a wrong question. That's not who Superman is. But in this movie, I feel like they went out of their way to show you who Superman is while still giving him room to grow, which I'm like, that's what we're here to do when we're making movies and when we're watching movies. It's all the same. It's like who the character is should still be who the character is, even if you need to sort of place them where they are in their arc. That's totally fine. Like Batman Begins with Bruce Wayne being willing to kill Joe Chill. He has that scene with the gun. Like of course he doesn't do it because that's not what the character is, but it's a circumstance that forces him to reconcile his feelings and choose to be on the path that makes him Batman. And I think what I love about this movie, what I'll say is this to me, even though we've already had Superman 78, which, if anyone's seen that movie, but look, we're in a new generation. You can't just expect the new generation to have watched that and have something to go off of. But to me, this Superman movie is what the first Spider-Man movie was when that came out, where I'm like, that's Spider-Man. I know there's a lot of people who disagree with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, but from what I saw in the cartoon and eventually reading Spider-Man comics, when I saw that first Spider-Man, and I didn't even get to see that on the big screen because I was really broke and the theaters were packed for weeks. For a really long time, it was hard to see that first Spider-Man movie. But that's the feeling I had where Spider-Man was just that right amount of light and dark. Understanding that this is a comic book movie that should appeal to adults and kids. Where Superman, I've always felt, should be more light than dark. And I think what essentially Tim Burton did for Batman and what Sam Raimi did for Spider-Man, finally, I would say for the modern day audience, this is what James Gunn did for Superman and gave us a Superman who is more light than dark. And not to disregard the Christopher Reeve Spider-Man, but just for the modern audience, for the millennials and for the Gen Zs who, are coming up in this world. Again, I do think Superman yelled a bit too much, but I hope that in future movies his arc is much more the statesman that he's supposed to be. Which is also, I gotta say, I liked his costume. It makes total sense. I don't think we already have other movies that gave us the other versions of the costume. Christopher Reeve gave us the classic costume. Superman Returns gave us the classic costume in maroon. And then Man of Steel gave us a modern day, I'd say more 80s version of the costume. And it was cool too. But I like this costume because it looks the most like a costume where someone could come out and just talk to you. Whereas I think the Christopher Reeve, Brandon Routh suit, they do look so goofy. You know what I mean? Like, I can't talk to this guy. You're wearing Speedos, man. Brandon Routh is literally wearing a Speedo. And, and Christopher Reeve's outfit seriously looks like a goofy wrestler outfit. A really goofy. He looks like he's missing a luchador mask, with all due respect. And I still love that movie, those movies, and he is the best, unequivocally. But I like this costume because, again, we already have the other costumes. I don't need to live by comparison, even though I'm living by comparison. But I don't need to judge this movie based on the other movies. That's what I think's so great about this movie. I don't need to judge it based on the other movies. And I just appreciate that this costume is the closest to what I feel the Superman costume should look like in a modern era. I don't think the Superman costume going forward should look like a wrestler's outfit. I do think it should look like kind of almost regular clothes. It should look approachable. It should look like a diplomat is coming to visit and speak to people. Because ultimately, even though Superman throws a lot of punches, his greatest power is diplomacy. He'll try to work things out before throwing a single fist. Partially because he knows he'll win every fight, but also because that's who he is. And in my mind, if I did a Superman movie, I would really go more for like that Magneto, not straight black or anything, but Magneto's look in the first X-Men, where he kind of looks like he's wearing a kind of general's outfit, but kind of like I could go out and go to a fancy party. I would much more go for that kind of look, that where I would go in the direction of he kind of looks more like a diplomat. I mean, he can have trunks or no trunks, but just make the costume look like a kind of a diplomat representative from another country trying to dress their best, but in their own culture, so that they can come to your culture and sort of say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm friendly. I'm accessible. These are my colors. This is how we dress in my country," but sort of somewhat modified to look, appropriate for your culture. So I really feel like that's what Superman should be looking like in modern day times, and I think this is the closest we've got to that. He looks, if you got rid of the trunks, he would really look like he's just in some kind of, I don't know, um, somewhat stylized diplomat's outfit. He should look approachable. And I think the costume works for me. I don't need it to look any different. It works for this movie. By the end of the movie, when we see him for the last time in his outfit, or the last two times, I'm just like, dude, this is the Superman from the comic book. I can't believe that that's what I'm seeing. I was very pleased. I was happy to have a movie. Again, it's more light than it is dark, and that's what Superman should be. And I think James Gunn and team absolutely nailed it. There are two end credit scenes for those of you who haven't caught this movie yet. There's two end credit scenes. The first one is real short. It's like 5 seconds long. And the second one, it's more of a kind of deleted scene. So for the end credit scenes, they're not setting up anything for future movies at all. But if you want just one last little giggle, that's what you can stick around for. That's all I'll say for that. Because I wish I knew that, because when I saw them, I was like, I don't really need to sit through the credits for this, but I wasn't sad that I did either. You know what I mean? So just that's what I'll tell you about the end credit scenes. So yeah, and I don't talk about the end credit scenes. I have a spoiler video coming up. I'm not going to talk about the end credit scenes because, again, technically they're just deleted scenes that are just for you to laugh at. So I really just you make up your own mind if that sounds like something you want to sit through the credits for, because they are long credits. But they're still nice to watch. Yeah, they're not setting anything up, but it was nice to watch. So that's my spoiler-free thoughts. I have a very long, spoiler-full video coming up later this week. Please hit that like and subscribe if you want to see that. So hopefully you stick around for that. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Mahalo and aloha to all you movie nerds, dorks, and weirdos. Hopefully, I'll see you next time. Bum, 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 bum. Also, I really love the graphic design for the titles. I love the throwback Superman logo look, Superman graphic look that went back to the 70s. I thought that's great. That's cute. I think this movie's solid. Okay, that's enough. Cool.